Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The first time I saw it was my third week working at Holly Hill Inn. I was carrying a tray of dirty dishes back to the kitchen when I caught a glimpse of something in the doorway. A silhouette that didn't match any of our staff. It lingered for just a heartbeat before vanishing, leaving behind an icy patch of air that raised goosebumps along my arms. "You saw it too, huh?" Eliza, one of the veteran servers, asked me later that night. "Everyone does, eventually." I'd taken the job at Holly Hill out of desperation. After my photography business in Lexington went under. Turns out wedding photography is a saturated market. Who knew? I found myself behind on rent and frantically scrolling through job listings. The historic Holly Hill Inn, nestled in tiny Midway between Lexington and Frankfort, needed night servers urgently. The pay was surprisingly good, especially considering the modest prices on their farm-to-table menu. Only after I started did I understand why they had to offer premium wages. Midway itself is picturesque, almost artificially so. It's one of those small Kentucky towns with a single main street, Railroad Street naturally, lined with boutiques and historic buildings, and anchored by railroad tracks that still carry freight trains through several times daily. The town has perhaps 1,700 residents, and they all seem to know each other's business. Except, curiously, when it comes to Holly Hill Inn. Built in 1845, the white-columned Greek Revival building sits just outside town proper, surrounded by rolling bluegrass pastures, dotted with thoroughbred horses. By day, it's charming, the kind of place featured in Southern Living. By night, it transforms. You know, this place was on that Ghost Hunters knockoff show last year. Tanner, our bartender, told me during my first week. They set up all their fancy equipment in the main dining room and the kitchen, then abandoned the shoot after the first night. Just packed up and left without explanation. The production company later claimed technical difficulties, but the locals know better. 3 different teams of paranormal investigators have visited Holly Hill in the past decade. None has published findings, released footage, or returned for follow-up visits. Chef Miranda, who runs the kitchen with military precision, prohibits discussion of the incidents during business hours. But after closing, when only night staff remains, she's the one who educated me on the rules. "These aren't suggestions," she'd said, sliding a handwritten list across the stainless steel prep table. "Your predecessor ignored Rule 5. That's why we had the opening." I'd glanced at the list, thinking it was standard restaurant protocol, until I read the first item. If you see a diner still seated after 11 p.m., do not approach them directly. Ring the antique bell at the hostess stand once and proceed to the kitchen. "Is this some kind of hazing ritual?" I'd asked, forcing a laugh. Chef Miranda didn't smile. "The Historic Society claims 8 people died unnatural deaths in this building before it became a restaurant. That's the official number anyway." I hadn't believed any of it. Not until I saw that silhouette in the kitchen doorway. Not until I watched it shift and contort as it withdrew into the shadows. Not until I felt the temperature plummet in its wake. I've been at Holly Hill Inn for 3 months now. I've learned to follow the rules meticulously. Most nights pass without incident if you're careful. Tonight, though, tonight was different. And I need to document what happened, because I'm not sure any of us will make it through another shift if I don't figure out what changed. So let me tell you about the rules at Holly Hill Inn, and what happens when they're broken. My shift started like any other Tuesday evening. I arrived at 4 p.m., just as the golden afternoon light bathed the white columns of Holly Hill Inn in honeyed warmth. The contrast between day and night at this place never ceased to amaze me. how something so welcoming could become so forbidding after sunset. "Table 7 has been asking for you specifically," said Margot, the day manager, as she handed over the reservation book. Her expression tightened. The Caldwell family. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The Caldwells were local royalty, thoroughbred money going back generations. They owned half the horse farms surrounding Midway and held considerable sway with the Woodford County Historical Society. They also never ever dined past 9 p.m. at Holly Hill. "Did they say why?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Their youngest, Parker, is home from college. Birthday celebration." Margot wouldn't meet my eyes. "They've requested the private dining room upstairs, the Jockey Club room." I merely dropped the reservation book. The Jockey Club room had been closed for renovation since before I started, allegedly due to floor damage, but I'd overheard Chef Miranda arguing with the owner about keeping it sealed permanently. "I thought that room was off limits," I whispered. "Owner's orders. Can't turn down the Caldwells." She handed me a ring of antique brass keys. "These unlock the service pantry upstairs. Don't forget to take the hand crank radio with you when you go up. Cell reception is non-existent on the second floor." As Margot gathered her things to leave, Chef Miranda emerged from the kitchen. She took one look at the keys in my hand, and her normally composed face faltered. "Jockey Club room?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "My office. Now." I followed her through the bustling kitchen where prep cooks were chopping vegetables for tonight's farm-to-table menu. Chef's office was barely larger than a closet, wedged between dry storage and the walk-in refrigerator. She closed the door and pulled a worn leather journal from her desk drawer. "The rules are different for the Jockey Club room," she said, flipping through pages filled with handwritten notes. "I need you to memorize these tonight, before the Caldwells arrive." She tore out a page and handed it to me. The paper felt oddly warm, as if it had been sitting in direct sunlight rather than inside a drawer. "The Holly Hill Inn Night Service Guidelines. Upstairs edition. Never serve food or drink after 10:30 p.m. in the Jockey Club room, regardless of customer requests. The antique mirror on the east wall must be covered with its velvet drape before the first course is served. If a guest uncovers it, excuse yourself immediately and notify chef. There is a china cabinet in the northeast corner. If you hear knocking from inside it, ring the silver bell on the mantelpiece 3 times and leave the room for precisely 5 minutes. If a guest requests the house special, but it's not on the menu, inform chef immediately. Do not improvise or suggest alternatives. Should you notice an extra guest at the table who wasn't present when you took initial orders, do not acknowledge them. Continue serving only the original party. The windows must remain closed after sundown, regardless of temperature complaints. If the chandelier begins to swing without a breeze, immediately offer fresh water with lemon to all guests. Make sure the lemon touches their lips before they drink." "What happens if these rules are broken?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Chef Miranda closed the journal. 3 years ago, a server named William thought the rules were superstitious nonsense. He ignored number 5, served an extra guest who appeared during a private dinner party. 3 days later, we found his car parked at the trailhead of Shaker Village. William was never found, but hikers reported seeing someone matching his description walking into the woods at odd hours. Each sighting placed him farther from the trails, moving with a strange, stiff gait. She leaned forward. The night William disappeared, security cameras at the Holly Hill gate captured him returning to work at 3 a.m. Except according to his roommate, William never left their apartment that night. He was sound asleep. A chill crawled up my spine, despite the kitchen's warmth. "One more thing," Chef added. "The Caldwells always finish dinner by 9 p.m. This request for a late reservation isn't like them." The dinner service proceeded normally until 8:30 p.m., when the Caldwells arrived. All 6 of them, including Parker, the birthday boy. They were handed off to me, and I led them upstairs to the Jockey Club room. As we climbed the narrow staircase, I noticed Parker looking back over his shoulder repeatedly, as if checking whether we were being followed. When we reached the landing, he whispered something to his mother that made her face pale beneath her perfect makeup. I unlocked the Jockey Club room door with trembling hands, trying to recall every detail of Chef Miranda's rules. The door swung open to reveal a stunning oval dining room, with forest green wallpaper and hunting scenes in gilt frames. The antique mirror on the east wall reflected our group, except I could have sworn, for the briefest moment, Parker Caldwell cast no reflection at all. I guided the Caldwell family to their table, a massive cherrywood oval with Queen Anne chairs arranged perfectly around it. Mr. Caldwell, a silver-haired man with weathered crow's feet that spoke of decades squinting across his horse pastures, took the seat facing the door. His wife, Margaret, elegant in pearls and a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, sat across from him. "Parker, sit by your father," Margaret instructed, her voice carrying that distinctive blend of Kentucky and old money. The birthday boy, who looked more withdrawn than celebratory, nodded and took his seat. I couldn't shake the discomfort that had nestled in my chest since seeing Parker's absent reflection. As I distributed menus, I stole glances at him. He was perhaps 20, with sandy hair that kept falling across his forehead. Unlike his parents and 3 older siblings, who were engaged in light conversation, Parker kept glancing toward the china cabinet in the northeast corner, the one mentioned in rule number 3. "We'll start with a bottle of champagne," Mr. Caldwell announced. "It's not every day your youngest turns 21. Parker flinched. "Dad, I'm 22 today." A strange silence fell over the table. Margaret's hand froze mid-reach for her water glass. "Of course," Mr. Caldwell said with an apologetic laugh. 22. Time flies. But I caught the concerned glance that passed between the pants. I nodded and moved to cover the antique mirror with its velvet drape before heading downstairs for champagne, mentally checking off rule number 2. As the heavy fabric settled over the glass, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement in the reflection, not of anyone in the room, but of someone standing in the doorway behind me. I whirled around. The doorway was empty. When I returned with the champagne and took their dinner orders, I noticed the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. The family didn't seem to notice, but goosebumps prickled along my arms as I poured champagne into crystal flutes. "Will you be joining us this evening, sir?" I asked, turning to Parker's older brother James, who had been oddly quiet. 5 pairs of eyes snapped to me in alarm. "I just meant for dinner," I stammered, confused by their reaction. "Did you decide on your own tray?" James cleared his throat. "Yes, I'll have the duck." As I finished taking orders and retreated toward the kitchen, Margaret Caldwell caught my wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "Please tell Chef Miranda that we appreciate her accommodating us tonight," she said softly. "We know it's unusual, but today is significant for our family." Downstairs, the kitchen hummed with activity. Chef Miranda glanced up from plating an appetizer as I entered. "Everything okay up there?" she asked. "I think so. They ordered champagne to celebrate Parker's birthday." I handed her the dinner orders. Though there was a weird moment when his dad thought he was turning 21 instead of 22. Chef's hands paused. "Did you say Parker Caldwell?" "Yes, the youngest son." She exchanged a look with Tanner, who had come into the kitchen to fetch a wine bottle. "What else did they say about him?" "Nothing unusual, just that today is significant for their family." Of course it is, Tanner muttered, pouring himself a small shot of bourbon. It's the anniversary. Anniversary of what? Chef Miranda wiped her hands on her apron. Parker Caldwell died exactly 1 year ago today. Car accident on McCracken Pike by the old stone bridge. His Jeep went into Elkhorn Creek during that flash flood last May. The order pad slipped from my fingers. That's impossible. He's sitting upstairs right now. He's having the lamb. Chef closed her eyes briefly. Was the china cabinet making any noise? No, but... I swallowed hard. When I covered the mirror, I thought I saw something in the reflection. And Parker... For a second when we first entered, I could have sworn he didn't have a reflection at all. Listen carefully, Chef said, her voice low and urgent. The Caldwells lost their son last year. If they're upstairs with someone they believe is Parker, we need to be extremely careful. This has happened before. Not with the Caldwells, but with other families. What has? Sometimes, on the anniversary of a death, especially a sudden one. She hesitated. Local legend calls them borrowed faces. They come back wearing the appearance of someone who died before their time. They can be convincing. They have the memories, the mannerisms, but they're not human. And they're usually looking for a replacement. Tanner nodded grimly. If the family acknowledges the truth, the entity leaves. If they play along, pretending their loved one is still alive, it finds someone else to take. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. What do I do? Follow the rules to the letter, Chef instructed. Especially number 5. If you notice an extra guest who wasn't there before, do not acknowledge them. They're looking for witnesses, for someone to validate their presence. I carried the appetizers upstairs on shaking legs. When I re-entered the Jati Club room, the Caldwells fell silent. They'd been speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Parker was pale, staring into his champagne flute as if it contained answers instead of bubbles. Your starters, I announced, distributing small plates of spring asparagus with hollandaise. Can I get anyone another drink? I think we're fine, Mr. Caldwell said stiffly. As I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. There was a water drop on the hardwood floor near the china cabinet. As I watched, another drop fell, then another. I glanced up, expecting to see a leak in the ceiling, but there was nothing. The drops were forming from thin air. By the time I returned with their own trays, a small puddle had formed. None of the Caldwells seemed to notice it, though Parker kept glancing in that direction. His food remained untouched. Is everything to your satisfaction? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Everything's fine, Mrs. Caldwell said too quickly. Isn't it, Parker? Parker looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. Do you see it too? He whispered. Parker, his father snapped. That's enough. See what? I asked, immediately regretting it. The water, Parker said. It's from the creek. It's always there, following me. I apologize for my son, Mrs. Caldwell interrupted. He hasn't been feeling well. A heavy silence blanketed the room. I nodded and backed away, nearly colliding with the china cabinet. As my elbow brushed against it, a distinct knock sounded from inside. Rule number 3. If you hear knocking from inside the china cabinet, ring the silver bell on the mantelpiece 3 times and leave the room for precisely 5 minutes. My heart hammering, I crossed to the fireplace and picked up the small silver bell. The Caldwells watched me with expressions ranging from confusion to outright fear. Only Parker seemed unsurprised, resigned almost. I rang the bell 3 times, its clear tone cutting through the silence. I'll check on your meals in a few minutes, I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. As I stepped out, closing the door behind me, I heard Mrs. Caldwell say in a choked voice, "Parker, honey, we know it wasn't your fault." The rest was cut off as the heavy oak door latched shut. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, checking my watch. 5 minutes. I couldn't go back in before then, no matter what I heard. And I definitely heard something. Muffled conversation at first, then what sounded like weeping, followed by a shout. Just as my 5 minutes were about to expire, there was a crash of breaking glass. I threw open the door to find the Caldwells huddled together, staring at the china cabinet. Its doors hung open, shelves empty of the antique dishes that had been displayed there earlier. The floor was littered with broken crystal and porcelain. And there, in the midst of the shards, a puddle of water was spreading across the floor, much larger now, with ribbons of red swirling through it like blood. "Everyone all right?" I asked, surveying the mess of shattered porcelain and crystal. The Caldwell family had backed away from the china cabinet, forming a tight cluster near the windows. Mrs. Caldwell clutched her husband's arm, her knuckles white against the dark fabric of his suit jacket. Their older children, James, Emily, and Kathleen, surrounded Parker like a human shield. Parker alone seemed calm amid the chaos. He stared at the growing puddle, his expression almost peaceful. "We're fine," Mr. Caldwell said curtly. "Just an accident. We'll cover any damages, of course." I nodded, though it was clear this was no ordinary accident. The cabinet doors hadn't simply swung open. They looked as if they'd been forced from the inside, the brass hinges partially torn from the wood. "I'll get something to clean this up," I said, grateful for an excuse to escape the tension in the room. As I turned to leave, the chandelier above the table began to sway. There was no breeze, no draft that could explain the movement. The crystal pendants clinked softly against each other like wind chimes. Rule number 7. If the chandelier begins to swing without a breeze, immediately offer fresh water with lemon to all guests. Make sure the lemon touches their lips before they drink. "I'll bring fresh water as well," I added, trying to keep my voice steady. Downstairs, I found Chef Miranda waiting anxiously by the service stairs. "I heard a crash," she said. "What happened?" "The china cabinet emptied itself onto the floor," I replied, grabbing a broom and dustpan. "And now the chandelier is swinging on its own. I need water with lemon slices." Rule 7. Chef's expression darkened. "This is escalating too quickly. Did anyone acknowledge what Parker really is?" His mother started to say something about it not being his fault, but that was when I had to leave the room after the cabinet knocked. "The creek," Chef muttered. "His Jeep went into Elkhorn Creek. That explains the water." She quickly prepared a pitcher of ice water and arranged lemon slices on a small plate. "Make absolutely certain the lemon touches their lips. It doesn't matter if they drink the water, but the lemon must make contact." What does the lemon do? Separates truth from illusion. Old Kentucky folk remedy. She handed me the tray. "Be quick, but don't run. Whatever's wearing Parker's face, it's gathering strength. The broken dishes, the swinging chandelier. It's testing boundaries." I took a deep breath and headed back upstairs, balancing the water pitcher, glasses, and cleaning supplies. The hallway outside the Jockey Club room felt different now. Darker, despite the wall sconces burning bright. The air was heavier, carrying the faint scent of river mud and decay. When I re-entered the room, I found the Caldwells seated once more, the broken dishes pushed to the perimeter of the room. They'd resumed eating as if nothing had happened, though none of them seemed interested in their food. They pushed morsels around their plates, maintaining the pretense of a normal dinner. All except Parker, whose plate was now completely empty, licked clean. "Fresh water," I announced, setting down the pitcher and beginning to pour. I placed a slice of lemon on the rim of each glass, my hands trembling slightly. Chef recommends a squeeze of lemon. It complements the flavors of your entrees. I served Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell first, then their older children. Each took a perfunctory sip, the lemon touching their lips as instructed. When I reached Parker, he stared at the glass without taking it. "I don't need water," he said, his voice oddly flat. "I've had enough water to last a lifetime." Mrs. Caldwell made a small, pained sound. "Parker, please," she whispered. "Take the water." Reluctantly, he reached for the glass. As his fingers brushed mine, I felt a jolt, not of electricity, but of cold so intense it burned. Parker's hand was soaking wet, though there was no visible moisture. He raised the glass to his lips, and I watched intently to ensure the lemon made contact. The moment it did, he jerked back as if stung. Water sloshed over the rim, adding to the puddle on the floor. "I should clean up this broken glass," I said, kneeling to sweep up the shards. As I worked, I noticed something strange about the puddle. It wasn't just spreading, it was flowing. A thin stream of water moving purposefully across the floorboards toward the door. I followed its path with my eyes and froze. There, in the doorway, stood a figure I hadn't noticed before. A young woman in a serving uniform identical to mine, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She was watching the family with a blank expression, a serving tray held at her side. Rule number 5 echoed in my mind. Should you notice an extra guest at the table who wasn't present when you took initial orders, do not acknowledge them. Continue serving only the original party. The rule mentioned guests, not staff, but the principle seemed clear. I averted my eyes and continued sweeping, my heart pounding. When I risked another glance at the doorway, the unknown server was gone. "Do you have a twin?" Emily Caldwell asked suddenly, looking directly at me. I froze. "Excuse me?" "I just saw someone who looked exactly like you, standing by the door," she continued. "Same uniform and everything." The temperature in the room plummeted. The water on the floor began to freeze at its edges, forming delicate crystals that spread like lace across the hardwood. "Emily, there's no one else here," Mr. Caldwell said firmly. "Just our server." I nodded, desperately trying to stick to the rules. "That's right. It's just me tonight." Parker laughed, a hollow sound with no humor in it. "You're all such liars," he said, his voice deeper than before. "We see each other, don't we?" His eyes met mine, and in their depths, I saw not the warm brown of before, but a watery blue-gray, like sunlight through creek water. "Parker, that's enough," his father commanded. "It wasn't enough for all of you to pretend at my funeral," Parker continued, ignoring him. "Now you're having a birthday dinner for me. Why? Because you can't face what really happened." The light fixtures buzzed and dimmed. The room grew colder still. "We're not pretending," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "We just miss you, Park. We wanted one more dinner together." Parker's face contorted with anger. "One more dinner won't change anything. One more dinner won't answer why none of you told the police about the car that ran me off the bridge." A shocked silence fell over the table. "What car?" James asked. "Your accident report said you lost control in the rain." "There was a car," Parker insisted. "Black, with tinted windows. It followed me from town, forced me off the road at the bridge. I tried to call you." He looked accusingly at his father. "You didn't answer." Mr. Caldwell's face had gone ashen. "Son, I never received a call." "Check your blocked numbers," Parker hissed. "Check the call log from that night." The water puddle expanded suddenly, soaking the hem of Mrs. Caldwell's dress. She didn't seem to notice, her gaze fixed on her husband. "Robert?" she questioned. Did Parker try to call you that night?" Before he could answer, the lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. The only illumination came from the waxing moon outside the window, casting a silvery glow across the table. In that pale light, Parker's appearance began to change. Water streamed from his hair, his clothes, pooling around his chair. His skin took on a bluish tinge. I backed away, nearly bumping into the covered mirror. As my elbow brushed against the velvet drape, it slipped slightly, revealing a sliver of reflective surface. In that narrow glimpse of the mirror, I could see the entire room reflected. The table, the Caldwell family frozen in shock, the growing puddle on the floor. Everyone was reflected in the glass except Parker. In his place sat the female server I'd seen earlier, wearing my uniform, but with her features blurred and indistinct, like a photograph taken underwater. She turned her head slowly, looking directly at me through the mirror. Her mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth too numerous and sharp to be human. I quickly fixed the drape, but it was too late. I'd seen her, and worse, she had seen me seeing her. "I need to check with the kitchen about dessert," I stammered, backing toward the door. "No one leaves," Parker said, but his voice had changed, blending with a higher feminine tone. "Not until we resolve this." The temperature dropped further. My breath fogged in the air. "Resolution requires truth," Parker continued in that unsettling dual voice. "The Caldwells know what happened that night, don't they, Robert?" Mr. Caldwell's hands shook as he reached for his water glass. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The black car with tinted windows," Parker said. "The same one parked behind your office every Thursday. The nights you told Mother you were working late." Mrs. Caldwell turned to her husband, confusion written across her face. "Robert." Mr. Caldwell's expression hardened. "This has gone far enough. Whatever you are, you're not my son. My son died in an accident. A tragic accident." "Did I?" Parker asked softly. "Or was it convenient? What would the shareholders say if they knew where their money was really going? What would happen to the family name if the truth came out?" The water on the floor was rising now, defying physics, swirling around our ankles like a living thing. "Father made a call that night too," Parker said to his siblings, "right after I tried to reach him. Check his call history. Ask him who owns the black car." I edged closer to the door, my shoes squelching in the inexplicable flood. Whatever was happening between the Caldwells, I needed to get Chef Miranda. This had escalated beyond any rules I'd been given. As my hand closed around the doorknob, Parker's head snapped toward me. "The staff here know more than they admit," he said. "Ask your chef about the other accidents. Ask her why they really closed this room." The door behind me clicked, locking itself. The knob turned to ice beneath my fingers. "No one is leaving," Parker repeated, rising from his chair. As he stood, water cascaded from his clothes, but instead of falling, it flowed upward, swirling around him like reverse rainfall. Not until justice is served. And then, with a sound like rushing rapids, the hovering water crashed down upon us all. The water struck with physical force, knocking me back against the door. For one terrifying moment, I thought we would drown in this sealed room, but the liquid defied natural laws. It swirled around us at waist height, neither rising further nor draining away, creating a bizarre suspended pool. The Caldwells clung to each other and the heavy dining chairs, which remained inexplicably anchored to the floor despite the current. Their fine clothes now plastered to their bodies, they looked less like Kentucky aristocracy and more like shipwreck survivors. Only Parker seemed at home in this aquatic chaos. He stood at the head of the table, perfectly dry despite being the apparent source of the flood. The water around him churned and parted like he was Moses at the Red Sea. "Now," he said, that unsettling dual voice more pronounced. "Let's talk honestly." Mrs. Caldwell sobbed, mascara trailing down her cheeks in black rivulets. "Please," she begged. "Whatever you want, just don't hurt my family. Your family." Parker's face twisted into a bitter smile. What about me? Wasn't I family too, or was I just collateral damage? I pressed myself against the door, fingers scrabbling uselessly at the frozen knob. The hand crank radio Margot had given me earlier was clipped to my belt, now submerged in the impossible indoor lake. I unclipped it, wondering if it still worked, if anyone downstairs could hear a distress call. Before I could try, movement in the water caught my eye. Something was swimming near the floor, a dark shape circling the table like a shark. I drew my feet up, pressing my back harder against the door. "Robert," Parker continued, focusing on his father. "Tell them about Elaine Brewer." Mr. Caldwell's face drained of color. "This isn't—" "Tell them!" Parker shouted, and the water surged in response, rising momentarily to chest height before receding back to our waists. "Dad?" James asked, teeth chattering from cold. "Who's Elaine Brewer?" Mr. Caldwell closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked 10 years older. "She's an investment partner. Nothing more." "Investment partner," Parker repeated with a hollow laugh. "Is that what you call it? The woman you've been seeing for 3 years? The one you were with when I tried to call you that night?" Mrs. Caldwell's hand flew to her mouth. "Robert, is this true?" The tension in the room thickened. Even the water seemed to still, waiting for his answer. "Yes," Mr. Caldwell admitted finally. "But I would never have hurt Parker. I loved my son." "Then why was your husband driving the car that ran me off the bridge?" Parker demanded. "Why was Daryl Brewer following me that night? Did you tell him about our conversation that morning? About how I found the missing investment funds?" The water rippled around us, carrying whispers just below the threshold of understanding. The dark shape beneath the surface moved faster now, circling tighter. I needed to act. Clearly, there was more happening here than ghost stories and strange rules. This was about secrets, betrayal, and possibly murder. The entities in this room, whether Parker's vengeful spirit or something darker wearing his face, were feeding on these buried truths. I remembered Rule 4. If a guest requests the house special, but it's not on the menu, inform chef immediately. Do not improvise or suggest alternatives. No one had requested this mysterious dish, but perhaps it represented something else. Something the spirits wanted that only Chef Miranda could provide. With trembling fingers, I turned the hand crank on the radio, generating enough power to transmit. The device crackled to life, water dripping from its casing. "Chef Miranda," I spoke into it, hoping the kitchen staff still monitored this channel. "We need the house special in the Jockey Club room. Emergency." The radio hissed with static for a long moment. Then, Chef's voice came through, barely audible. "Understood. Hold position. Do not break." The transmission cut off abruptly. Parker's head swiveled toward me, eyes now completely transformed into pale, nuclear orbs like riverstones. "Calling for help?" he asked. "They can't save you. No one could save me either." The shape beneath the water rose suddenly. A woman's body, waterlogged and blue-tinged, wearing the same uniform I had seen on the mysterious server. She breached the surface like a corpse rising from the depths, floating horizontally just beneath the water's surface, her dark hair fanning out around her head. "You don't recognize Lily?" Parker asked me, gesturing to the floating woman. "She worked here 3 years ago, served the Brewers many times. She knew about the affair, didn't she, Robert?" She knew about the embezzlement too. Planned to report it until she had an accident on the back stairs. Mr. Caldwell shook his head vehemently. I had nothing to do with any accident. Lies, hissed the floating woman. Lily, her voice bubbling through the water. I heard you and Brewer talking that night, planning it all. I recalled Chef's words about the previous server, William, who had disappeared after breaking Rule 5, acknowledging an extra guest. Had Lily made the same mistake? Had she seen something she shouldn't have in this room years ago? A sharp knock at the door behind me nearly sent me jumping out of my skin. The sound repeated, 3 distinct raps. That'll be your chef, Parker said, smiling coldly. With the house special. The lock clicked open of its own accord. I stumbled away from the door as it swung inward, miraculously holding back the water, as if an invisible barrier stood at the threshold. Chef Miranda stood there, her white coat pristine, holding a covered silver serving dish. Her face betrayed no surprise at the impossible lake filling the room, nor at the floating body or Parker's transformed appearance. The house special, she announced, stepping into the room. The water parted around her feet, leaving her dry as she approached the table. As requested. She placed the covered dish in the center of the table and removed the lid with a practiced flourish. Inside was not food, but a collection of objects. A small, leather-bound book, a tarnished key, a folded document, and a vial of clear liquid. The ledger Lily found, Chef said, nodding to the book. The key to the safe deposit box where you kept the records, Mr. Caldwell. The original accident report that was later altered. And water from Elkhorn Creek, taken from where Parker's body was found. Parker stared at the atoms, his expression flickering between rage and sorrow. You knew, he said to Chef. You knew all along. Holly Hill stands at a crossroads, Chef replied calmly. Not just geographically, but spiritually. Things that happen here leave echoes. The house remembers, even when people try to forget. You could have stopped it. The floating woman, Lily, accused. You could have warned Parker. Chef's composure cracked slightly. I didn't know in time. By the time the house showed me the danger, it was too late. She turned to Mr. Caldwell. But it's not too late for justice. Mr. Caldwell lunged suddenly, reaching for the items on the tray. This is absurd. You can't possibly... His words cut off as the water surged, wrapping around him like tentacles and dragging him under the surface. Mrs. Caldwell screamed, reaching for her husband, but her children held her back. Just as suddenly as he'd been pulled under, Mr. Caldwell resurfaced, sputtering and gasping. The water receded from around him, revealing him on his knees, soaked and shivering. The house special, Chef Miranda said quietly, is truth, followed by justice. That's what these spirits want, what they need to move on. Parker approached his father, the water continuing to part around him. Tell them what you did. All of it. Mr. Caldwell coughed, expelling water from his lungs. He looked around at his family's horrified faces. I was embezzling from the company, using the money to finance a new venture with Elaine Brewer and her husband. Parker found out. He was working in accounting for the summer. He confronted me that morning, threatened to go to the board. And? Parker demanded. I told Daryl that Parker knew. I swear I never thought he would. Mr. Caldwell broke down, burying his face in his hands. He said he'd just talk to him, scare him a little. I didn't know he would run him off the road. The room fell silent, except for the gentle lapping of water. Even the whispers beneath the surface had stopped. Why here? I found myself asking. Why Holly Hill Inn? This is where it started, Parker replied, his voice now sounding more like his own, less mingled with Lily's. Dad and Elaine would meet here, in this room, Private dinners while Mom thought he was working late. Lily served them. She overheard things, kept notes. He nodded to the leather book. Dates, amounts, conversations. Enough to expose everything. Chef Miranda picked up the vial of creek water. "The house needs balance," she said. "What was taken must be acknowledged. What was hidden must be revealed." She unstoppered the vial and poured its contents into the larger pool around us. As the water from Elkhorn Creek merged with the supernatural flood, a change rippled through the room. The temperature began to rise. The water level slowly started to recede. Parker stood over his father, looking down with an expression more sad than angry now. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth. And with those words, the transformation began. The water pulled back like a tide, swirling around Parker and Lily, engulfing them in twin whirlpools. As the liquid drained away, so too did their forms, dissolving like sugar in hot tea, until nothing remained but two small, gleaming puddles on the floor. The Jockey Club room stood restored, dry, warm, and eerily normal. The Caldwell family remained, shocked into silence, their clothes mysteriously dry despite the flood that had engulfed us moments before. Only the items on the silver tray provided evidence that anything unusual had occurred. That, and the haunted expressions on the faces of the surviving Caldwells. Chef Miranda closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a long breath. "The rules exist for a reason," she said, breaking the silence. "To maintain balance. To prevent the house from seeking justice its own way." She turned to me, her expression grave. "But now there's a new rule you need to learn. Quickly." "The new rule," Chef Miranda said, gathering the items from the silver tray, "is that once the house has witnessed a confession, anyone involved must leave the premises before midnight. The truth creates a vulnerability, a doorway, if you will." She checked her watch. "It's 10:17 now. We need to get the Caldwells out of here." Mrs. Caldwell had collapsed into a chair, her perfect composure shattered. Her older children huddled around her, throwing accusatory glances at their father, who stood apart, looking broken and aged. "We can't just leave," Catherine protested. "Not after whatever that was. What happened to Parker? Was that really him?" Chef shook her head. "What you saw was an echo, given form by the house's peculiar energy. It wasn't exactly Parker, but it wasn't exactly not him either." She turned to me. "Help me get them downstairs. They need to go home. Now." "I'm not going anywhere with him," James said, jerking his chin toward his father. "Not after what he confessed." "That's your choice," Chef said firmly, "but you all need to leave Holly Hill. What happened here tonight has weakened the barriers. If you stay past midnight, you'll see things meant to remain hidden. Things that might follow you home." I moved to help Mrs. Caldwell to her feet. She looked at me with vacant eyes, shock having settled into her system. "Come on," I said gently. "Let's get you somewhere safe." As we helped the family gather their belongings, I noticed something odd. The puddles left behind by Parker and Lily's dissolution were gone, but faint wet footprints led from where they had been to the covered mirror on the east wall. The velvet drape fluttered slightly, though there was no breeze. Chef followed my gaze and moved quickly to the mirror, adjusting the cover to ensure it was completely concealed. "Don't look at the glass," she warned in a low voice. "Not tonight." We managed to guide the Caldwells downstairs to the main dining room, which had been cleared of other guests. Tanner waited by the front door, car keys in hand. "I'll drive them home," he offered. "Make sure they get there safely." Mrs. Caldwell shook her head. "I don't want to go home. Not with him." She stared at her husband with revulsion. "I've called the sheriff." Chef Miranda told her quietly. "They'll meet you at your house. The items from upstairs, the ledger, the report. They need to see those." Mr. Caldwell didn't protest. He simply stood there, a hollow shell of the powerful man who had arrived earlier that evening. As Tanner led the family outside, Chef pulled me aside. "Once they're gone, we need to cleanse the Jockey Club room. The house has tasted truth tonight. It will be hungry for more." "What does that mean?" I asked, a chill spreading across my skin despite the warmth of the main dining room. "It means the rules are changing. What happened upstairs created a ripple effect." She handed me a small cloth bag that smelled of herbs and spices. Salt, sage, rosemary, and a few other things. "We need to create a boundary line at every doorway and window in that room." I followed her back upstairs, the bag clutched in my hand. The air grew noticeably colder as we approached the Jockey Club room, our breath clouding before us. The door stood slightly ajar, though I was certain we had closed it behind us. Chef paused, listening. "Do you hear that?" At first, I heard nothing. Then, as I concentrated, I caught it, a faint rhythmic sound like water dripping. Except it wasn't coming from the room ahead of us. It was coming from behind us, from the shadowy end of the hallway where the staff staircase was located. "Someone else is here," Chef whispered. "Something drawn by what happened." She pushed open the door to the Jockey Club room and ushered me inside. The space appeared normal. The broken dishes had been cleaned up, the china cabinet restored to its former glory. The table sat as if awaiting new guests. Too normal, given what had transpired. "Start with the windows," Chef instructed, taking a handful of the mixture from the bag. "Line the sills completely. Don't leave any gaps." As I moved to the first window, I noticed my reflection in the glass. Except something was wrong. My movements in the reflection were slightly delayed, as if the mirror me was half a second behind. I blinked, and my reflection blinked a moment later, a subtle smile spreading across its face that I most certainly was not wearing. I jerked away, dropping some of the herb mixture onto the floor. "Don't look at your reflection," Chef warned. "Not in anything, not the windows, not the silverware. Just focus on the task." I nodded, keeping my eyes down as I carefully lined the windowsill with the mixture. The herbs hissed softly as they touched the wood, like water on a hot pan. "Why is this happening?" I asked, moving to the next window. I thought Parker and Lily found peace when the truth came out. Chef was working on the doorway, creating a solid line of the mixture across the threshold. They did, in a way, but their presence here for so long weakened the veil between worlds. This house has history. Deaths, secrets, lost things. Some from before it was ever a restaurant. The Historical Society's official number was 8 deaths, I recalled from what she'd told me my first week. Chef's laugh was without humor. The Historical Society knows what the prominent families of Woodford County want them to know. There have been many more deaths here, recorded and unrecorded. The dripping sound from the hallway grew louder, more insistent. Accompanying it now was a soft squeaking noise, like wet shoes on a polished floor. My hands trembled as I finished the third window. Only one more to go, plus the fireplace and the china cabinet. The house exists at a crossroads, Chef continued, working methodically. Not just physically, but spiritually. Streams of energy converge here. Some natural, some not. That's why the rules work. They're not superstition, they're navigation markers. The temperature in the room dropped further. The overhead lights dimmed and brightened in a slow pulse. "Almost done," Chef said, her voice tight with tension. "We need to cover the mirror next." A loud crash from the hallway cut her off. Something heavy had fallen or been pushed. Chef's eyes met mine. "Finish the windows," she ordered. "I'll check what that was." "Is that safe?" I asked. "Shouldn't we stay together?" "The room needs to be sealed before midnight. We're running out of time." She glanced at her watch. "It's 11:42. We have 18 minutes. Before I could protest further, she slipped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her. I hurried to finish the last window, then moved to the fireplace, creating a line of herbs along the mantelpiece. The china cabinet was next. As I approached it, I noticed the doors were slightly ajar. Hadn't they been closed moments ago? I reached out to shut them properly before applying the herb mixture. The moment my fingers touched the brass handle, a cold, wet hand closed over mine from inside the cabinet. I yanked back with a startled cry, stumbling away. The cabinet doors swung open, revealing empty shelves. No hand, no person, nothing that could have touched me. Yet my skin remained ice cold and damp where I'd felt the contact. "Focus," I told myself. "Almost done." I sprinkled the mixture along the bottom of the cabinet, my hands shaking so badly that I spilled some onto the floor. The herbs sizzled against the wood, releasing a pungent aroma that temporarily overpowered the earthy smell of river mud that had permeated the room. Only the mirror remained. I approached it cautiously, remembering Chef's warning not to look at its surface. The velvet drape hung slightly askew, revealing a sliver of the glass beneath. I reached to adjust it, keeping my eyes averted. As I tugged the heavy fabric back into place, a flicker of movement in that exposed strip of mirror caught my eye. Despite my best intentions, I looked. It wasn't my reflection staring back at me. It was Lily, her face pressed against the glass, as if trying to push through, her eyes wide and desperate. Behind her, I could see others, shadowy figures crowding around her, their features indistinct, except for their eyes, which gleamed with a hungry light. "He's coming back." Lily's lips formed the words, though no sound came through the glass. "He never left. He's been here all along." I stumbled backward, dropping the herb bag. Lily slapped her palms against the mirror's surface from the inside, the impact creating ripples like a stone thrown into a pond. "Chef!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Chef Miranda!" No answer came from the hallway. The dripping sound had stopped. The overhead lights flickered rapidly now, each flash revealing the room in a different state, sometimes as it was now, sometimes flooded with water as it had been earlier, sometimes showing an older version of itself with different wallpaper and furniture. In one flash, I saw bloodstains spreading across the floor. In another, the table was surrounded by diners in clothing from another century, their faces turned toward me with expressions of horror. I fumbled for the herb bag, desperate to complete our task. As I reached for it, the temperature plummeted further. My breath clouded before me, each exhale forming shapes like words in a language I couldn't read. The door burst open, slamming against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Chef Miranda stumbled in, her white coat stained with dark patches that looked black in the flickering light. "We need to leave," she gasped. "Now, the cleansing isn't working." "What happened to you?" I asked, horrified by her appearance. "Daryl Brewer," she said, clutching her side. "He's here." "Brewer? The man who ran Parker off the road? But how?" "He killed himself 3 months ago. Guilt, most likely." She grimaced, checking her watch. 11:57. We have 3 minutes to get out of this room. "But the mirror, it's not sealed yet." Chef shook her head. "No time. The mixture won't work now anyway. The barrier's been breached." She pulled me toward the door, but I hesitated, glancing back at the mirror. The drape had fallen completely now, exposing the glass. Instead of reflecting the room, it showed a different scene entirely. The stone bridge over Elkhorn Creek, darkened by night and heavy rain. A car was parked on the side of the road, its headlights cutting through the downpour. A man stood by the guardrail, peering over into the rushing water below. "That's him," Chef confirmed, following my gaze. "Daryl Brewer, the night he ended his life at the same spot where Parker died." As we watched, unable to tear our eyes away, another figure approached Brewer from behind, a young man in soaking wet clothes. Parker. He placed a hand on Brewer's shoulder, and the older man turned, his face contorting in terror at the sight of the boy he had killed. Parker's lips moved, saying something we couldn't hear. Then, with a simple push, he sent Brewer over the edge of the bridge. "It wasn't suicide," I whispered. "No," Chef agreed. "It was vengeance. And now both of them are here." The clock on the mantelpiece began to chime midnight. With each sonorous gong, the images in the mirror shifted. Parker at the bridge, Parker in the Jockey Club room, Parker in the kitchen of Holly Hill Inn, watching the staff through the doorway. Always present. Always observing. "The new rule," I said suddenly, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "It's not just about getting people who witnessed a confession out before midnight, is it? It's about not being here at midnight at all." Chef nodded grimly. "Parker never moved on. He's been here all along, using Lily and others like her to find his father's associates. Tonight was just the beginning. He has unfinished business with everyone connected to his death." The final chime of midnight echoed through the room, and all the lights went out simultaneously. In the perfect darkness that followed, I heard it. The sound of water, not dripping now but rushing, like a flash flood tearing through a creek bed. And beneath that, footsteps, multiple sets, approaching from all directions. "He's not alone," Chef whispered, "and they're hungry for justice." "Don't move," Chef Miranda breathed, her fingers digging into my arm. They navigate by sound and movement. We stood frozen in the pitch darkness of the Jockey Club room, listening to the cacophony of footsteps and rushing water that surrounded us. The air had turned frigid, carrying that distinctive smell of river mud and decay. "Who are they?" I whispered, barely audible. "The lost ones. Spirits who died unjustly on or near this property. Parker has awakened them." Her voice hitched slightly. "We need light." I patted my pockets, remembering the small flashlight I kept on my keychain for checking wine labels in the dimly lit cellar. My fingers closed around it, just as something cold and wet brushed against my cheek, like fingertips testing my skin. Fighting the urge to scream, I slowly extracted the flashlight and pressed the button. A weak beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a sight that turned my blood to ice. The room had transformed. Water seeped from every crack in the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from the ceiling. It didn't fall or pool naturally, but clung to the surfaces like living tissue, pulsing with a subtle rhythm. And in that slick coating of water, faces emerged and receded, dozens of them, contorting in silent screams or frozen in expressions of rage. "The back stairs," Chef Miranda said, pulling me toward the exit. "Stay in the light." As we moved, the faces in the water tracked our progress, some retreating into the walls while others pushed forward, becoming more defined. Hands began to emerge, reaching toward us with fingers that stretched unnaturally long. We reached the door, but the handle refused to turn. "It's locked," I hissed, jiggling it frantically. Chef nudged me aside and extracted a master key from her pocket, her hands remarkably steady despite the horrors surrounding us. The lock clicked open, and we tumbled into the hallway. immediately confronted by a new terror. The corridor had elongated impossibly, stretching at least 3 times its normal length. The staff staircase, which should have been just 15 feet away, now appeared as a distant rectangle of dim length. Between us and it stood several figures, human-shaped but wrong in subtle ways, their proportions slightly off, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Don't run," Chef warned as I instinctively backed up. "Running triggers them to chase." "So what do we do?" "Casually stroll past the nightmare fuel blocking our escape." "Exactly that." She straightened her stained chef's coat with dignity. "Walk confidently, stay in the light, and whatever you do, don't respond if they speak to you." Taking a deep breath, I directed my flashlight beam ahead and began walking, matching Chef's careful pace. The figures in the hallway shifted as we approached, rearranging themselves but not directly blocking our path. As we drew closer, I could see them more clearly. A middle-aged man in outdated clothing, his neck bent at an uncomfortable angle. A young woman whose dress dripped endlessly onto the carpet. An elderly gentleman with a gaping wound in his chest. And a child of perhaps 10, pale as moonlight with hollow eyes. "Ms. Miranda," the child said as we passed, her voice echoing as if traveling through water. "You promised you'd help us. You promised we could rest." Chef's step faltered slightly, but she didn't respond or look at the girl. "We trusted you," said the woman in the 1940s dress, her voice bubbling wetly. "You were supposed to keep the boundaries strong." The elderly man reached out as we passed, his fingers elongating to brush Chef's shoulder. Where he touched, her coat darkened with moisture. "The rules kept us contained," he whispered. "Now we're free to seek what we're owed." My heart hammered against my ribs as we continued our careful procession down the impossible hallway. The staircase still seemed so far away, and I could hear more footsteps behind us, splashing in shallow water that wasn't visible on the carpet beneath our feet. "Almost there," Chef murmured encouragingly. "Don't look back." Naturally, the moment she said it, I felt an overwhelming urge to do exactly that. I fought it, keeping my eyes fixed on the staircase ahead, watching as it gradually grew closer. The temperature continued to drop until our breath clouded before us in thick plumes. Ice crystals formed on the wallpaper, spreading in fern-like patterns. The light from my small flashlight weakened, the battery struggling in the extreme cold. "They're drawing energy," Chef explained, noticing the dimming light. "These manifestations require power, electrical, thermal, whatever they can absorb." 20 feet from the staircase, my flashlight flickered and died completely. In the sudden darkness, I heard a surge of movement behind us, splashing footsteps accelerating, accompanied by a chorus of whispering voices. "Run," Chef commanded, abandoning her own advice. "Now." We sprinted the remaining distance, pursued by sounds that belonged in nightmares. Wet footfalls, rattling breaths, and beneath it all, Parker's voice chanting words I couldn't understand, but somehow recognized as names. Names of people connected to his death, perhaps, or future victims. We burst through the stairwell door and tumbled down the steps, the harsh fluorescent lighting of the service stairs momentarily blinding after the darkness. Chef slammed the door behind us and braced herself against it. "It won't hold them for long," she panted. "We need to get to the kitchen. I have supplies there. Salt, iron, stronger herbs." "What happens if we can't stop them?" I asked, dreading the answer. "They'll hunt everyone connected to Parker's death. The Caldwells first, then Brewer's widow, then business associates, bank officials who ignored the embezzlement, maybe even distant connections like customers who frequented this room when Robert and Elaine met here." She pushed away from the door. "Eventually, they'll expand their definition of justice to include anyone they believe has committed wrongs." We descended the stairs quickly, emerging into the back hallway that led to the kitchen. The rest of the restaurant seemed unnervingly quiet. "Where's everyone else?" I asked. "The other staff." I sent them home when the Caldwells arrived, standard procedure for private events in the Jockey Club room. Chef pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. Small mercies. The kitchen, usually alive with activity and noise, stood silent and empty. Chef moved quickly to a cabinet beside her office, extracting a worn leather satchel. "We need to perform a containment ritual," she explained, pulling out bundles of herbs, small cloth bags of salt, and several iron implements that looked like antique cooking tools. "It won't banish them, but it might reestablish the boundaries until morning. And then what? Then we contact Judith Harmon." "Who's that?" "Local historian, expert in Kentucky folk magic. She helped establish the rules after the incidents in the 1980s. Chef handed me several iron pokers. "Put these at each exterior door. Doorway, threshold, and lintel. Form a triangle." I took the implements, still processing what she'd said. "You mean this has happened before?" "Every few decades, something weakens the barriers. Usually, it's related to justice denied, secrets kept, crimes concealed. The house accumulates energy like a battery until something triggers a release." She tied a bundle of herbs with practiced efficiency. "Last time, it was a maid who died after being pushed down the stairs by the owner's son. Before that, a slave who was killed on this property trying to escape in 1859. Before I could reply, the lights in the kitchen flickered and dimmed. The industrial refrigerators hummed loudly, struggling against the sudden power drain. The temperature plummeted again, our breath fogging before us. "They're coming," Chef said. "Quickly now." I hurried to the rear delivery entrance, arranging the iron pokers as instructed. As I positioned the final piece, a soft voice spoke from just outside the door. "Let me in." I flinched, nearly dropping the poker. The voice was familiar. Lily, the server who had appeared in the mirror. "I can help you," she continued, her tone gentle and reasonable. "I know how to stop this. Just open the door." "Don't respond," Chef called from across the kitchen, where she was placing her own markers at another entrance. "It's not really her." "But what if it is?" I found myself asking. "What if she knows something?" "Trust me, it's..." The rest of Chef's warning was drowned out by a tremendous crash as every cabinet door in the kitchen flew open simultaneously. Pots, pans, and utensils launched into the air, suspended for a heartbeat before clattering back down in a deafening cascade of metal. In the chaotic noise, I heard the voice again, now directly beside my ear. "They won't stop with the guilty. They'll take everyone at Holly Hill, including you." I whirled around, finding myself face to face with Lily. She appeared solid, though water dripped constantly from her hair and clothes, forming a puddle that didn't spread but remained contained beneath her feet. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her eyes sad. "You're innocent. You don't deserve what's coming." Against my better judgment, I responded. "What's coming?" A smile spread across her face. Too wide, too pleased. "Justice." The iron pokers I'd arranged suddenly shot away from the door as if repelled by a magnetic force. They clattered across the floor, coming to rest at opposite ends of the kitchen. The back door creaked open, of its own accord, revealing not the parking lot, but a stretch of creek bank, rain-soaked and muddy. A car's headlights illuminated the scene from somewhere off-screen, and a figure stood silhouetted against the light. Parker, watching something in the water below. "See for yourself," Lily invited, gesturing to the impossible scene beyond the doorway. "See how it happened." I felt a pull toward the open door, a compulsion to step through and witness Parker's final moments. My feet moved of their own accord, taking one step, then another. A strong hand gripped my shoulder, yanking me backward. Chef Miranda slammed the door shut and thrust a line of salt across the threshold. "Never accept an invitation from them," she said fiercely. "Never follow, never watch what they show you. Once you become a witness, you become a participant." Lily's form flickered like a television with poor reception. Her expression shifted from friendly to furious in rapid alternation. Water began to flow up her body instead of down, defying gravity as it swirled around her. "You can't keep us contained," she snarled, her voice deepening and blending with others. "The rules are broken. We're free now." Chef grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "The walk-in freezer," she instructed. "It's lined with steel. It might hold them off long enough for the ritual." As we backed away, Lily's form stretched and thinned, becoming less human with each passing second. Other figures began to materialize around her. The spirits from the hallway, the faces from the watery walls, and at their center, Parker Caldwell, no longer appearing as the young man from dinner, but as something ancient and vengeful. "They'll hunt the Caldwells first," Chef said as we retreated, "but we'll be next. Anyone who witnessed the truth becomes part of their justice." "What about Tanner?" "He drove them home." Chef's face paled. "We need to warn him, but first, we need to survive until dawn." We backed into the walk-in freezer, the metal door feeling reassuringly solid as we pulled it closed. Chef immediately began arranging her ritual items, creating a circle of salt and herbs around us. "This won't stop them for long," she admitted, lighting small bundled herbs that filled the cold air with pungent smoke. "But it might buy us time." Outside our steel sanctuary, the sounds of chaos increased. Shattering glass, running water, and a multitude of footsteps circling our position. Beneath it all, I heard Parker's voice again, now chanting an unfamiliar rhythm that made my skin crawl. Chef grabbed my hands, pulling me into the center of her circle. "Repeat after me," she instructed, her voice steady despite the terror surrounding us. "What walks in water returns to water. What rises in vengeance returns to rest. What seeks in darkness yields to light." As I repeated the words, a heavy impact struck the freezer door, denting the metal inward. Another blow followed, and another, each one weakening our barrier. "What walks in water returns to water," we chanted louder as water began seeping under the door. "What rises in vengeance returns to rest." The assault on the door paused momentarily. In the sudden silence, I heard a new sound, a vehicle engine, tires on gravel, approaching the restaurant. "Someone's here," I whispered. Chef's expression tightened with fresh worry. "Tanner. He's back." The pounding on the freezer door resumed with renewed fury, accompanied by Parker's voice, no longer chanting, but laughing, cold and triumphant. "He's brought us another witness," the voice exulted, "another participant in our justice." "We have to warn him," I said, moving toward the freezer door. Chef caught my wrist. "If we open that door before the ritual is complete, we're both dead. And if we don't, Tanner is." The pounding on the door intensified, each impact leaving deeper dents in the metal. Water continued seeping underneath, now reaching the edge of our salt circle. When it touched the white granules, it hissed and steamed like water hitting a hot pan. Chef pulled her phone from her pocket. "No signal. Not in here." She glanced at her watch. "The ritual needs 4 more minutes. 3 minutes and 40 seconds now." I could hear car doors slamming outside, followed by Tanner's voice calling out. "Chef? Are you here? The Caldwells. Something happened." His footsteps echoed through the kitchen, accompanied by another voice. Female, unfamiliar. "This is exactly as I feared," the woman said. "They've broken containment completely." "Judith," Chef whispered, her expression brightening. "She's with him. The historian you mentioned." Chef nodded, continuing the ritual preparations with renewed urgency. "If anyone can help us, it's her." The assault on our door abruptly ceased. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the pounding had been. I could picture the spirits turning their attention to the new arrivals, abandoning us for fresher prey. "We have to finish this now," I insisted, "before they get to Tanner and Judith." Chef hesitated, then nodded grimly. "We'll accelerate. It won't be as effective, but it might give us a fighting chance." She quickly rearranged the herbs, creating a more compact circle, and lit the remaining bundles simultaneously, rather than in sequence. The freezer filled with fragrant smoke that burned my eyes and throat. "What walks in water returns to water," Chef chanted, her voice stronger, more commanding. "What rises in vengeance returns to rest. What seeks in darkness yields to light." I joined her, our voices blending as we repeated the words 3 times. With each repetition, the temperature in the freezer rose slightly, pushing back against the supernatural cold. "By salt and iron, by herb and fire, I bind you to your place," Chef continued, adding new words to the chant. "By truth revealed and justice sought, I bind you to your rest." Outside, I heard Tanner shout something indistinct, followed by the sound of breaking glass. A woman, presumably Judith, called out words in a language I didn't recognize. "Now," Chef said, grabbing a small vial of clear liquid from her satchel. She uncorked it and handed it to me. "Pour half of this in a line across the threshold when we open the door. Keep the rest for emergency use. It's water from 7 Kentucky springs, blessed during a solstice ritual." I nodded, clutching the vial tightly. "Stay behind me," she instructed, picking up an iron poker that now glowed faintly with heat, despite the freezer's cold. "Don't look directly at any spirits. Don't respond if they speak to you. And whatever you do, don't cross flowing water, real or supernatural, unless there's absolutely no alternative." She counted down from 3, then heaved the freezer door open. I quickly poured half the blessed water across the threshold as instructed, watching in fascination as it sparkled with an inner light that normal water shouldn't possess. The kitchen beyond was in chaos. Every tap and drain spewed water that flowed not downward, but upward, defying gravity to form writhing columns that vaguely resembled human shapes. The overhead lights flashed erratically, briefly illuminating Tanner and an elderly woman, Judith presumably, backing toward the dining room, surrounded by these fluid apparitions. "This way," Chef called to them, brandishing her glowing poker. "Quickly!" Tanner turned at the sound of her voice, relief washing over his face. He grabbed Judith's arm, guiding her toward us. As they moved, a larger column of water coalesced near the swinging doors to the dining room. It shaped itself into a recognizable form: Parker Caldwell. Though his features were fluid and constantly shifting, eyes and mouth appearing and disappearing like whirlpools in his aqueous face. "Your protection failed," he said, his voice somehow both gargled and crystal clear. "Just like it failed me." "I never promised to protect you, Parker," Judith replied, her tone stern despite her evident fear. "I promised to maintain balance. You're disrupting that balance now." Parker's watery form surged taller, nearly touching the ceiling. "Balance? What about justice? What about retribution for what was done to me, to all of us?" "Justice isn't yours to dispense," Judith countered. "Not like this." Tanner and Judith reached us, crossing over the line of blessed water into our relative sanctuary near the freezer. The moment they did, Parker lunged forward, his form stretching like a tidal wave about to crash down upon us. Chef thrust the iron poker into the center of the watery mass. Steam erupted from the point of contact, and Parker's form temporarily dispersed, droplets spraying across the kitchen before beginning to flow back together. "Inside," Chef ordered, ushering us back into the freezer. "We need to complete the binding ritual." "It won't hold him," Judith warned as we retreated. "Not anymore. He's gathered too many to his cause." "Then what do we do?" I asked, helping to pull the damaged freezer door closed behind us. It no longer sealed properly, leaving a gap through which cold air and smoke escaped. Judith extracted a leather-bound book from her bag. "We need to separate him from the others. Parker is the anchor, the focal point drawing power from Elkhorn Creek. The others are simply following his lead." "How do we separate spirits?" Tanner asked, his bartender's composure completely shattered. "We need to show him truth beyond vengeance," Judith replied, flipping through her book. "Something pure that connects to his humanity, not his anger." Chef nodded in understanding. A memory, something from before his death that meant everything to him. "But what?" I asked. "We barely know anything about him besides how he died." Tanner cleared his throat. "I might know something. Parker used to come here on Saturday mornings for breakfast. Always ordered the same thing, French toast with local strawberries. Always sat at table 14 in the main dining room." "Why table 14 specifically?" Chef asked. "It's where he had his first date with Melissa Jenkins. They were high school sweethearts. She moved away for college right before he died." Judith's eyes lit up. "That's it. A connection to love, not revenge. Where is table 14? "Main dining room by the east window," Tanner replied. "We need to get there," Judith said decisively, "with something of Parker's, something personal." Chef shook her head. "We don't have anything of his." "Yes, we do," I realized suddenly. "The hand crank radio Margot gave me. Parker's name is engraved on the back. I noticed it earlier but didn't think anything of it." They all turned to me with renewed hope. "Where is it?" Judith asked urgently. I patted my belt where I'd clipped it, but found nothing. I must have lost it upstairs, during everything that happened. The freezer lights flickered ominously. "They know what we're planning," Judith whispered. "We need to move quickly. 2 of us have to retrieve the radio while the others prepare table 14. "I'll go for the radio," I volunteered. "I know where I last had it." Chef nodded. "I'll go with you. Tanner, you and Judith get to table 14 and start preparations." Judith handed Chef several small packets. Salt, sage, blackberry thorns, and creek mud from 7 tributaries. Create a circle around yourselves as you move. It won't stop them, but it might slow them down. We quickly divided the supplies, with Chef and I taking the defensive materials, while Tanner and Judith kept the ritual components. The plan was simple, but terrifying. Split up, retrieve the radio, meet at table 14, and somehow use Parker's connection to this Melissa person to break his hold on the other spirits. Simple, except for the army of vengeful water ghosts between us and success. "Stay close," Chef instructed as we eased the freezer door open again. "And remember, don't look at them directly. Don't answer if they speak. Don't cross flowing water," I recited. "Got it." The kitchen had transformed further in the brief time we'd been inside the freezer. The floor was now submerged beneath 6 inches of water that flowed in complex patterns, creating currents that resembled script in an unknown language. The watery columns had multiplied, now numbering at least a dozen, their forms more defined. I could distinguish clothing styles from different eras, hairstyles, even facial features rendered in liquid. Parker's form was no longer visible, but his presence permeated the space. A pressure against my eardrums, a weight in the air. Chef stepped out first, scattering a line of the mixture Judith had provided. Where it hit the water, small whirlpools formed, spinning counterclockwise and creating momentary clear spots on the floor. "Now," she whispered, and we moved quickly toward the service stairs, leaving Tanner and Judith to make their way toward the dining room. The water spirits turned their attention toward us, flowing across the floor with unnatural speed. Chef scattered more of the mixture in wide arcs, creating temporary barriers that the spirits circled around, rather than crossing directly. We reached the stairwell and began climbing, the sounds of splashing water following close behind. The stairs themselves were dry, offering brief respite from the spirit's domain. "They're stronger in water," Chef explained as we ascended. "Faster, more cohesive. On dry ground, they have to work harder to maintain form." The upper hallway was dark when we emerged. The electricity apparently failed completely on this floor. Chef produced a small flashlight from her pocket, its beam weak but sufficient to navigate by. "Where did you last have the radio?" she asked, sweeping the light across the carpeted corridor. "Near the Jockey Club room. When the water rose, it was on my belt, then—" I paused, visualizing the sequence of events. Then Parker said something about the staff knowing more than they admit. I was backing toward the door, and that's when the knob turned to ice. We approached the Jockey Club room cautiously. The door stood wide open, the interior pitch black beyond the feeble reach of Chef's flashlight. Unlike the rest of the second floor, the doorway to this room was wet, water seeping outward from inside. "He's in there," Chef whispered. "Parker." This is where it all converged. His father's affair, Lily's discovery, the betrayal and cover-up. I scanned the hallway floor near the doorway, searching for the radio. "I don't see it. It must be inside." Chef's expression was grim as she sprinkled more of Judith's mixture across the threshold. "Then we go inside. But we take no more than 30 seconds. Count it down." I nodded, steeling myself. "On three. On three." We counted together, then stepped through the doorway into absolute darkness. Chef's flashlight seemed to dim further, barely illuminating a foot in front of us. The temperature dropped so drastically that my lungs seized with my first breath. "Look for the radio," Chef reminded me, her voice tight with cold and fear. I dropped to my hands and knees, feeling along the floor, near where I'd been standing earlier. The carpet squished beneath my palms, soaked through with icy water that numbed my fingers almost immediately. 15 seconds, Chef warned, sweeping her weakening light in widening arcs. My numb fingers brushed against something solid, rectangular, metallic. The radio. I grabbed it, the metal so cold it seemed to burn. "Got it!" I exclaimed, relief flooding through me. As if in response to my voice, the room came alive. The chandelier blazed with sudden blue-white light that was neither electric nor natural. The furniture rose from the floor, hovering several inches above the carpet. The velvet drape flew off the mirror, revealing not our reflections, but a window into somewhere else. The creek bank where Parker died, viewed from underwater, looking up at fractured moonlight. And there, seated at the head of the floating table, was Parker Caldwell. Not the watery approximation from downstairs, but a fully realized apparition, solid and detailed. His clothes and hair were dry, his eyes clear and focused. "You found my radio," he said conversationally, as if we were simply late-night guests rather than intruders. "I was wondering where that went." Chef grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door, but it slammed shut with a decisive bang. 30 seconds are up, Parker noted with a small smile. "And now you're here for the full service." He gestured to the empty chairs around the floating table. "Please, sit. Everyone will be joining us shortly." From the walls, ceiling, and floor, Water began to flow, forming into seated figures around the table. Lily, Daryl Brewer, the spirits from the hallway, and others I hadn't seen before, a dozen or more in total. "What do you want from us?" Chef demanded, her voice remarkably steady. Parker's smile widened. "Witnesses. Every judgment requires witnesses." He gestured to the radio in my hand. "And now that you have the final piece, we can begin." "Final piece," I echoed, confused. "To call her," Parker said simply. "To summon Melissa." I still work at Holly Hill Inn. Not because I want to, but because I have to. The hand crank radio sits on my nightstand beside a handwritten list of 16 rules, expanded from the original 7 after that night 3 months ago. I bring it with me every shift, though I'm not allowed to turn it on except in the most dire circumstances. Melissa's voice comes through sometimes anyway, a whisper beneath the static, begging us to let her cross over and join Parker. We didn't summon her that night, not successfully, but we opened a door that wasn't meant to be opened. When dawn finally broke, they found us, Chef Miranda, Tanner, Judith, and me, seated at table 14 in the main dining room, surrounded by a circle of salt and herbs, the hand crank radio in the center playing a distant, tinny version of their song. Something by The Cure, apparently. None of us remember how we got there or what transpired between Parker's demand in the Jockey Club room and sunrise. The water had receded by then, leaving no evidence except watermarks 6 inches high on every wall. The owner wanted to call it a burst pipe, but Chef insisted on the truth. The restaurant closed for renovations for a month, while Judith helped us establish new boundaries, new rules. The Caldwell case made headlines across Kentucky. Robert Caldwell confessed to financial crimes and conspiracy after the fact regarding his son's death. Elaine Brewer turned state's witness. Her husband Daryl was posthumously charged with vehicular homicide. Justice, of a sort. They found Melissa living in Chicago, working as a music therapist. She came back for the new trial, testified about Parker's final text to her the night he died, how he'd discovered his father's crimes and didn't know what to do, how he'd planned to meet her at Holly Hill the next morning to talk it through, how she'd waited at table 14 for hours, not knowing he was already gone. When they asked if she wanted to see where it happened, she refused. Said she could feel him watching her already. Said she heard running water in empty rooms. Said she felt cold spots following her through town. She left midway the next day. I sometimes wonder if she knows what she escaped. The Jockey Club room remains locked. Chef Miranda resigned, moved to Louisville to open her own place. Tanner stayed but doesn't close anymore. His shift ends promptly at 10 p.m. Judith visits monthly to reinforce the boundaries with rituals I'm not allowed to witness. Only I remain on night service. The rules specify that someone who is witnessed must always be present after dark. A gatekeeper of sorts. The new rules are specific and strange. Rule 12 prohibits playing any song released during Parker's lifetime over the restaurant's sound system. Rule 15 requires fresh flowers at table 14 every day, but never roses, which were Melissa's favorite. Rule 16, the most important one, forbids anyone from answering if they hear their name called 3 times in succession, no matter how familiar the voice. Sometimes, late at night, I see faces in the kitchen door's small window. Not just Parker and Lily now, but others. They watch me with patient eyes, waiting. The owner has tried hiring additional night staff twice. Both quit within a week, claiming they heard whispering from the drains. One said she saw her reflection continue moving after she stopped. So I serve alone, carrying trays of food and drinks, carefully following every rule. The guests never notice anything amiss. They enjoy their meals, leave generous tips, drive home to normal lives. I envy them. If you ever dine at Holly Hill Inn, ask for table 15, not 14. Order the special, but never the house special. Leave before 10 p.m. And if your water glass fills itself when no one is looking, pretend you don't notice. Some rules exist for a reason.